So recently I've read this, and I went on to Goodreads just to have a look at what people had to say, because I realized I had a few thoughts myself. In perhaps typical fashion, nobody on Goodreads seemed to have picked up the point that I picked up. Maybe I'm shooting off in the completely wrong direction, or maybe the people on Goodreads didn't give the book the attention, arguably, that it deserves, but that's a matter for you, not for me to decide. What is this? Well, this is a book that's hard to classify, and that's very much intentional. When I bought it, I wasn't sure whether it was fact or fiction, whether it was philosophy, whether it was historical. As it turns out, it's a mix of all of those things. So what this is, for perhaps necessary context, is a book about a possible application, an attempted application of the ideas of Thomas More. So you probably know who Thomas More is. He's very Googleable, but of course he was the Lord Chancellor in England at the time Henry VIII attempted to annul his marriage to Catherine of Aragon. Thomas More didn't like that and refused to essentially betray the Catholic Church, and of course Henry had him killed. His last words, "I die the king's good servant and God's first," proverbially anyway. And this is a book about Vasco de Quiroga, who was this Spanish bishop of a province of Mexico. Relevant dates for Quiroga are 1470 to 1565. He was one of the sort of leaders of one of their early provisional forms of colonial government. And Vasco de Quiroga attempted to put into action the ideas of Thomas More that were expounded in More's book, Utopia. So this book is an exploration of utopias, specifically of the attempted utopia of Quiroga as it was tried in Mexico shortly post-colonization. So what's so complicated about that, you ask? Why does it need to be reduced to this confusing meld of fact or fiction, philosophy, and this and that? Well, it's just because of the way that Toby Green has chosen to pursue the subject. I'll start off by saying I think it's quite a good book. It has some pretty big flaws, but I suppose we may get to those if I remember to talk about them. But you can tell that he's got a passion for the subject, and that alone makes it a quite interesting read. Why it's difficult to tell whether it's fact or fiction is that it's a historical fiction narrative. And so it tells the story of Vasco de Quiroga traveling to Mexico from Spain, and then sort of learning about and then trying to implement Thomas More's ideas. And that's intercut with, the chapters are intercut with the story of Toby Green going to Mexico to do research on Vasco de Quiroga to write the book. And so the Vasco de Quiroga chapters are all narrated, and they're kind of a historical fiction. And then the Toby Green chapters are ostensibly autobiographical, but what they actually are is a kind of urban fantasy fever dream where almost the second that Toby Green, the fake Toby Green, touches down in Mexico, things start to go off the rails. And it obviously turns into a kind of excuse for him to explore philosophical ideas about utopia. He sort of goes about, I'm going to talk about the Toby Green sections first. In fact, I'm only going to talk about them because I've kind of summed up the Vasco de Quiroga sections already. It's just a retelling of the life of Quiroga and his ultimately unsuccessful, though quite interesting and quite, at least at first, effective attempt to implement Thomas More's ideas. And what that essentially involved was building a lot of hospitals, many of which stood for 400 years after he was gone, and converting a lot of people, and reorganizing life within this one particular diocese according to those utopian principles. And it actually seemed to improve the quality of life for the Mexicans at the time. And so that sort of historical fiction part of the book goes through his biography, essentially, and it does narrate it, so you do get descriptions of, feelings and things, and you get physical descriptions and impressions that we have no evidence for, but it is quite well sourced. I'll actually crack the thing open, and I will show you that there are many footnotes and many quotes from the documents. So he's not doing too badly on that front. I suppose if you wanted a more rigorous factual account, you would go elsewhere, but that is not why you should be reading this, because, of course, as I have mentioned, and as I am now about to get into, the other half of the book is Toby Green's ridiculous, fantastical, urban fantasy adventure. It's really an excuse for him to have a lot of Socratic dialogues. He gets off the plane, he realizes that he doesn't have a hotel booked, so he sort of wanders about and meets all of these strange people who are strangely, unrealistically articulate, and strangely, unrealistically versed at a very coincidentally high rate, versed in the life and works of Vasco de Quiroga. And so you quickly realize that this is nonsense, and it's an excuse for him to have these Socratic dialogues with people from all these different strata of society. There's a very literate old man with a house full of books, and there's this kind of very helic lady who just lives in a living room and watches TV and eats pizza and chocolate chip cookies and watches television. And she was a Marxist in youth, but she has since become a disenfranchised utilitarian hedonist. And he kind of goes around Mexico and has all of these different encounters and tests the mettle of his utopian ideas. He's exploring the validity of utopia as a possible idea. And what makes it really fun is that as you go through the book, it becomes steadily less realistic, and more ridiculous. And he kind of devolves mentally into this Don Quixote state. And it's very easy to see why this is like Don Quixote. And Don Quixote is of actually great relevance to this book, because Don Quixote is, among other things, a satire and a parody and a deconstruction of those kinds of utopian, fantastical ideas. It's a deconstruction of idealism. And so as faux Toby Green goes through Mexico and starts to go mad and starts to think, I want to implement my own version of Vasco de Quiroga's ideas here again, all of these people that he meets try and dissuade him with various arguments. And he sort of persists on this quest, despite them anyway, and of course he gradually becomes more and more self-aware and more sane in the way that Don Quixote does in, self-titled, and eventually kind of snaps out of it and tries to make a different point around the second half of the book. So you might be asking yourself, what is the point of doing that? Well, first of all, as I have mentioned, I think it is done in this way because this guy actually has a real passion for the subject. But I also think it's done that way because he's trying to communicate the emotional pull of the idea of utopia. This is I don't know about the real Toby Green's opinions, although I can guess what they are. And I could guess what they are, from what they were/are from about the second page of his first section in the book. But he is this very idealistic Marxist, green, commie, lefty type of guy. And so, of course, he's very idealistic in the way that all of those people are, because that's what they believe, They're not pragmatists in the sense that, I don't know, an economist is sort of forced to be. They're idealists. And he deconstructs and he kind of makes fun of himself throughout the book. But the reason that he is interspersing the historical fiction Quiroga chapters with his own ridiculously fictionalized, Don Quixoteized satirical experience is because he's trying to show the emotional depth and the emotional attraction of the idea of utopia. It has nothing to do with being true in the sense of fact. It's true in the emotional sense, right? So I think I've probably spoken about this before, and if I haven't, you can probably find a discussion of it on my website. Easy, cheapo plug. There you go. But he's not telling you the truth in the biography sections, because it doesn't matter what the truth is. The truth is he probably went to Mexico, went to one archive, read a bunch of books, and learned all the stuff that went into the footnotes in the Quiroga chapters. He's trying to show you the emotional truth of it and trying to integrate that with his philosophical ideas about how things could possibly be improved, how we can integrate utopian or idealistic visions into our mental fabric without becoming ideological in a dangerous way, or without becoming unrealistic and just ruining everything. That's why it's like that, because it's almost a modern day application. That's why he has all of the dialogues with people from different social strata. It's a kind of testing ground. But I worked all that out, while reading the book. And then I was immensely disappointed to discover that he has also seen fit to point that out quite explicitly here. And now you can pause this. I'll just show you. The most important thing about this journey of yours is to rediscover the 16th century emotions and lay them bare so they can heal. That's why, you must integrate it with your own emotional world, And that's why one story, and this is what happens, and this is a very meta commentary, and I'm not sure I like that, because I did work it out for myself before I got to this point. It was quite cleverly done, and it was quite easily done too, right? That's why this tale of yours is becoming ever more complicated, all-encompassing, difficult to categorize. And, I've had this book for about 4 years. I have no idea how long I've had it for. It takes me 10 years to read some of this stuff, I buy it and then I leave it forever. And I wasn't sure where I should put it because I had no idea what it was. And this is why, right? Something that can adequately be described as factual. And of course, it's total nonsense, because in the next paragraph, the Juan Diego character is carried away by a band of roving Catholics and instantly canonized, which is quite entertaining. But I'll leave you to read that for yourself. And then the second part that I wish he had not included is, where is it? It is this paragraph, yes. There it is. The Quixotic journey that I had been propelled into by the old man in S-Town was over. I was my own person now. Blah, da, 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 da. You can pause this. Concentrating on the emotional level and by disregarding any other apparent truth. Right, so I got this without needing to be told it. And I feel like he's telling rather than showing, because he was showing that that's what he was doing all the way up until, this first bit where he says that he all but says that this is what I'm doing. He's referencing Don Quixote every 2 seconds. This part about the old man in S. The old man in S is the first one who tells him Don Quixote is important to what you are trying to do, because it's a satire of, this kind of a project. So, he's revealed the hand, he's spoiled the cards, and I'm impressed by the book. I think it's good. I think that is a flaw, however. There are other flaws, but they're not so egregious. But that's the kind of thing that it's just too obvious, right? And that kind of turns me off. I still think it's pretty good. I still think it's worth a read, and perhaps I should have known where to place it simply based off this. But never mind that. That's just me being a fool and not taking a close enough look for the past however many years I've had the thing. But all of this is to say, I'm even more disappointed in the Goodreads people, right? Because you can go on that website now and look at it, and not a single one of them has addressed anything that I've just said. I mean, they've obviously addressed the factual aspect of what this is, I think. I don't even remember what they've written, but none of them have said that this is supposed to be that the Toby Green sections, the faux Toby Green sections, are supposed to be an emotional exploration, that they are not supposed to be true, that they're supposed to be a philosophical investigation into the otherwise fact-based parts in the Quiroga sections, and that the two halves of this book form a single whole, which is an exploration of an idea, which is utopia, that Toby Green is intensely interested in, and which he will make you interested in as well. That's it.